Hey everybody, Rock DIY here. This piece right here was the external filter housing. I have no idea what it would completely look like, but this used to be on the back of the mower, like this, where this piece is right here. It was like this, and the owner put like one of those little nylon stockings over it as a filter. He doesn't have the original manual, so I had to download the manual. And when you pull up the manual, it doesn't show this part on here at all. It's just not there. So because this is all busted up, really useless, this was reproduced on a 3D printer in 3 pieces that all interlock. A clamp will go here. This had epoxy resin put on it, and then you got this part right here, so you could just slip a sock or whatever you decide to use as a filter over it. And so that's what will be done, and it can be put in any position. It can be put up like this, or it can be put down, however somebody wants to use it. This is a ignition switch for a Husqvarna iZ5223. This is a very common ignition switch. It has 2 keys, and then the positions on it are stop your lights when the engine is running, but only after starting it. This right here is where it's spring loaded and starts the engine, and then you leave it in this spot here. And if you look up assembly, disassembly of a mower ignition switch, typically the only thing they show you is how to remove the entire ignition switch from the lawnmower, not necessarily the actual assembly and disassembly of the entire ignition switch. And this one is, or has, 7 terminals on it, and it's typically locked in, as in this case. I've got it off right now, but typically if you loosen or take the little tab off on a couple of them, the rest of them, it'll come apart. When you remove this, you can see the contacts on the back side of the terminals, and then there's this piece. You need to be careful. These are very similar to others, but in some cases the internal components will be somewhat different. You can see this plate here with various areas where these contacts right here come into contact with this here to either ground or stop an action. And then there's this internal part right here as well. And then this on the back side, there are 3 holes, and those holes are where these 3 springs go in. And then you have a center spring. If you take this apart a little bit further, you gotta take the key out. If you take this apart a little further, it comes out like this, and you can see that there is a spring down in the bottom there. Now the question is, if you just disassembled this, is how do you put it back together? Because you could, because there's 3 holes for the springs there's 3 springs, but you could literally put it in any 3 of the positions. But if you did, without knowing where to put it, the ignition's not going to function properly, because this will not come into contact with the proper terminals. So you got to make sure that you line this up properly, and the way that you ensure you line this up properly is don't just completely disassemble it and not realize that it requires being put back in a certain way. So as you take it apart, you can take pictures, or you can mark it so that the markings go back where they were when you reassemble. Because as I was saying, if this was on here and this is turning, and you put it in any particular way, they're not going to line up where they're supposed to, especially when you go to turn the ignition key. And all right, so what would be the reason that you need to take this apart? You could just buy a new one, and these things vary in price, but you may want to take it apart to see that if you could possibly fix it. And in some cases you can fix it. You can clean up this here because you can see that there's some corrosion buildup on it. And normally this has a dielectric grease on it, and that gets contaminated. You can wipe all that off, wipe it off here, clean it up, and then you want to be generous with how much dielectric grease you put on here, because you want it to move smoothly and not get locked up in any particular position, because when it is dry, it does tend to notch a little bit. So you do want to make sure that you grease it up pretty good. Got a new ignition switch, and a lesson learned is if you order an ignition switch and the wrong one comes and it's dirty and used, when they send you a review, be careful, because I sent the old one back, they credited my account, and then I submitted a request for the proper one, and it was good. It was supposed to be delivered today, and then found out it was canceled, and apparently it was canceled because of my review. I didn't say anything mean or bad. I just said that wrong part, and dirty and used, and so they canceled my order. So I had to go buy this Stens. It's supposed to be a generic ignition switch, but it was actually more expensive than the other two that I had ordered. This one was $27 after tax. Now, as far as the PTO switch, still haven't gotten that. That has been delayed for some reason. So I went and got this off my neighbor's Husqvarna lawnmower that's similar to this one, except I think it's older, and it has the push on, push off PTO. This one has the handlebar type PTO right there. So couldn't use it off that lawnmower. But since I'm waiting on parts and I need to get going to get this done, I've got an ignition switch, I got the PTO switch, I've got the PTO clutch. And what I did was, it was kind of a pain in the butt, because when you're using a GoPro, yeah, you can review, but it's a lot more difficult to see. And if you set up your phone, you can see it kind of right away. But it was just easier to run some wires down to the plug underneath that goes to the PTO clutch when it's underneath. And I just ran the wires up here, connected it to the PTO clutch, and then start the lawnmower, and then engage the PTO, and voila, the PTO clutch does in fact work. So it wasn't a wiring issue. I kind of thought it was a wiring issue going from the PTO switch back to the plug, but brand new PTO clutch. Just ran these wires up here, and so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to start it up, engage the PTO. Now I can do this while I'm not sitting on the lawnmower because belt's not connected. PTO clutch is sitting here, so nothing's going to turn or spin. But if I pull the PTO knob, this should engage. So that's what I'm going to do. Should have seen that the PTO clutch did in fact engage and disengage like it's supposed to. So that's one more step forward. But one thing I do have to do is test the voltage, because the voltage should be between 13.8 and 14.2. If it's not, then it's not going to work properly. So I'm going to hook up multimeter right here. You do have to test the voltage while it is running. Measuring direct current, I got it on 200 volts, or the range is the highest set to 200, even though it will not reach that. Alright, so I'm going to start it up, engage the PTO again, and then check the multimeter. And I'm going to put it here so hopefully it can be seen on camera. All right, so I did the test and the voltage was actually around 11.8, so that's not good. But I've noticed that my multimeter is kind of acting funny, so I'm going to try this one more time, and then may have to change out the batteries on the multimeter or replace my multimeter because it's doing all kinds of wacky stuff. Let's see what happens. Alright, so it did bounce between 13.7 and 13.9. 13.9 was very brief, but you have to get it all the way up to full throttle in order to get that 13.8, so I'm on the bottom end of that. Here I am up underneath the back of the tractor, getting ready to put the PTO clutch on. Except in this case, I'm putting the original one back on because the new one does not fit. It's too small for the shaft here, and the keyway on the new one is bigger, so the keyway won't even slot in there. Went back and looked at the old PTO, see if I could fix it, and I believe I was able to. And you may recall this pin that holds this magnet in with this piece of plastic, it was shoved that way, so it was actually hitting these little rivets on the plate, so it was basically seized up. But what I was able to do is put a set of vice grips on it, kind of at an angle, pulled it over, but then this piece was a little loose, so I took a tamp and smashed it down on the other side so that it would tighten down and keep it in place, because if I hadn't smashed this down, it's possible that it could have been moving around and ended up back the same way it was. I also had to fix that wire inside here that was fixed, and so that's good. I just finished testing it and it actually works, so probably save about $165 returning the other PTO, even though that PTO was supposedly the same exact size as this one according to them, but it's definitely not. I even used a micrometer, and this one is about 1 millimeter larger, and then like I said, the keyway was bigger in the other one and would not fit on here. So getting ready to put this original PTO back on. All right, trying to put this belt back on. Alright, the belt is on. Probably would have been better if all this stuff was out of the way, but it's not. Alright, now that the deck belt is all the way on, I can tighten the bolt on the PTO clutch to spec, which is 50 to 55 foot-pounds. With the belt off, you can only tighten it so far, and then you'll start turning the engine. So you have to put the deck belt on and then tighten it to spec. Well, I misspoke. Thought putting the belt on would allow me to tighten this to spec, but still turns. So I had to go get this large crescent wrench to put on the keyway collar insert. Put this on here. This is gonna be fun. I'm gonna hold it with one hand while torquing it.